I'm ready. Thank you, Keith. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Today is part 2 of this series. And last week we talked about stress, and we'll dive into a little bit about what that was. But I like to say that if you hadn't had a chance to watch that, I would recommend at some point you go back in and watch it, because it'll kind of talk about continuation of what we talked about last week. For those of you that are joining me again this week, and I recognize a few familiar faces, thank you. But for those of you that don't know me, my name is Angelica Keene, and I work for the University of Florida Extension Office. I am the community development agent at the University of Florida Extension Office. What that means is it's my responsibility to look at the health and wellness of the community and support community initiatives and programs such as the Health First Mayor's Fitness Challenge with education, resources, content that I think can better individual lives, but as well as the community as a whole. So I am honored to be here with you guys today, delivering the part 2 of the stress management presentation, and specifically, you can handle it. With me today, I also have a co-presenter that I would like to take a moment to let her introduce herself before we dive into the presentation.
Hi, my name is Adrienne Bussico. I'm a student with Kaiser University and a dietetic intern here at the University of Florida's Extension. Angela and Beth have been very gracious to take me on the last leg of my tour of supervised practice, and I will be a graduate as of May 1st. I will be speaking on the mindful eating portion, and so now I will pass it on back to Angelica.
Yes, thank you, Adrienne. And we'll dive right into our presentation today, which is the stress management. You can handle it. So there we go. So kind of an overview or an outline of what we're going to cover today. We're going to cover a very kind of brief introduction to the concept of stress. We spent a lot of time last class talking about it, talking about the mind-body connection, how your brain functions, things like that. The bulk of what we're actually going to cover today, after the very quick review, is stress management and this idea of building resiliency. And resiliency is one of those things that is a learned behavior, and we'll dive more into that as the presentation goes. And then, like with all things, I like to leave people with tangible tools, meaning that we're going to talk about this idea as like broad conceptual discussion, kind of set the foundation and framework, but we're going to actually walk you through 3 separate techniques. Now, there's many more than this, but this is the 3 that we chose for this particular presentation to introduce you to. And that is one of many breath techniques. I'm talking to you about mindful eating. We don't, unfortunately, have snacks to give you to actually walk you through, which we wish we did, but that's a downfall of Zoom. So we're just going to talk about the tips and tricks and strategies. So when you hopefully go home and have dinner tonight, you can practice that mindfulness we talked about. And then we're going to actually end with a visualization. And I put the visualization activity at the end for replayability. So you can go back all the way through the presentation, or you can just kind of fast forward directly to that visualization activity. So if you find yourself, you really liked that and you liked the activity, you can skip right ahead to that and kind of reuse it again as you need to. So a little review on stress. We all have stress, and stress is something that comes at us to us from multiple different facets. So it can be relationships, friends, family, but the big thing to think about with stress in itself is actually a good thing. Stress, moderate to very small amounts of stress, means that your body, your brain is functioning exactly how it should. Your body is having those positive reactions and protecting you from those situations, those threats, those situations. But what happens is that if we don't learn to process our stress, to acknowledge how we feel, we end up in this state of chronic stress. And with chronic stress, that's where you start to have those negative consequences. That's when you start to have the effect on your body over time. So stress in itself is actually a good thing. I know nobody likes to believe it, and I'm not saying every situation is good, because Lord knows when you have a deadline, it doesn't seem like a good thing. but your body's response to it is actually a good thing because it means your body is doing its job it's designed to do. What we have to work on and what we've got to be aware of is when we start to recognize those feelings, how do we then move forward in this idea of resiliency and techniques to manage and control those body functions so that we don't end up in this chronic state. So it's really important to kind of be aware of all aspects of it and looking at not just simply how you feel, but what is your mood? Are you angry? Are you sad? Acknowledging that all emotions are valid and that all emotions play a part in this idea of managing our stress and building resilience in the future. So when I say building resilience, what do I mean? So resilience is defined specifically as a psychological process that when you're faced with adversity, how quickly do you bounce back? So it's basically a term that refers to the fact that your brain fires all of your body, does all of the stress hormones like it's supposed to. You start to feel those heart rates, the blood pressure increases, that all the things stress is supposed to happen. That's a good thing. Resiliency is this idea of how quickly can you bring your body back to normal. So another way to think about it is we talk about cardiovascular health, and everybody talks about how quickly your heart rate goes up and then comes back down, shows how fit cardiovascular health is or your heart health is. It's the same idea with stress. And it's not how quickly you get stressed and then how quickly do you come down. We want to learn both directions. It is how you are stressed at whichever rate you are stressed at, how quickly or how do you control that bounce back? I'm thinking about another aspect of resiliency. A lot of the times people are like, they say things like, oh, that person, they bounce back so quickly, they just never have stress. And that's actually false. What they find in research is those that have the highest level of resiliency are actually those that have had to practice it so many times. They're the person that suffered, adversity or a major trauma or experienced a really good, like a really bad situation or a very traumatic situation and had this like pain and emotional trauma and stress. And so they've actually built and learned the tools and techniques to kind of process those emotions. Again, I talked about the fact that your body's response to stress is exactly what's supposed to happen. What we need to focus on is those emotional responses to stress, which will then connect back down to those body forms. So what's great about resiliency is because it is a learned behavior, it is not simply a personality trait. So just like any muscle, the more you use it, the more likely you are to build it. And just like with any muscle, it takes time and it takes intentional practice and focus to build that muscle. But just like with muscles, there are specific steps you can do. There are steps that you can do with resiliency too. And I've kind of simplified it down to 4 key categories, 4 key areas for kind of building this resiliency muscle. Okay. And the first is just recognizing. So in our last week's presentation, we ended on a whole checklist of how do you feel? What are the signs and symptoms of stress in your body? And the reason I ended there, and the reason you haven't seen it, I hope you go back and watch it, or maybe you've done a tool like that, is because that's the first step. Just like with any problem, if you don't recognize you have a problem, can you solve a problem? Not usually, right? You first have to recognize there is going on. And so you first have to recognize how your body processes stress. So specifically, it might be something like, maybe you clench your teeth, maybe you increase your shoulders, maybe you get fidgety, maybe you withdraw, like any of those, but figuring out what your body does. So for example, when I get really stressed, I creep my shoulders up. Now I wish they would climb all the way up to my chin so that everybody could just be like, hey, you're stressed. Could you calm it back down? I'd be like, that's great. But they kind of actually pull back and squeeze together. And I can tell I haven't paid attention because I'll start to get this like little pinch behind the back of my head. And it starts like this really dull headache. and then progresses to a full-on headache. And I realized that at some point in the day, I started to become anxious, started to become stressed. My body did what it was supposed to do, but I didn't recognize it. I wasn't aware of it, in tune for it, and I didn't take the steps necessary to kind of bring everything back to center, process those emotions, process that situation, whether that be making task lists or different things. We're going to dive into specific techniques later to actually manage that stress. But that first step is that recognizing piece. If you don't recognize it, none of these other three are really going to help you because you don't even know what you're really trying to address. So the next is fostering this idea. So once you've recognized it, you've got to foster this idea of that wellness is not simply a body. Wellness does not mean lack of illness. That's part of it for sure, but that's not the only definition of wellness. Wellness is functioning at your highest level, whatever that is for you. So it has a mental component as well as a body component. And things like understanding that taking time for yourself and practicing some of the techniques that we're going to introduce you to is a form of this wellness. So a lot of terms, a term you hear thrown around a lot is self-care. And the reason people throw this term around a lot is because it helps you think about yourself. And it's just this idea of being aware of how you think, how you feel, and what you are dealing with in that time and that moment. So it's not selfish. It's not self-indulgent. It's not just simply every day I go get a massage or a facial. Like, it's actually this whole idea of looking at what do you need to do to kind of look at your health and wellness and foster this idea of whole person. So it could be something simple, like maybe saying no. Somebody asks you for help and you just don't have the time today. And you say something like, I really would love to help you. I don't have the time today. Maybe next week, that's something I could take on. And that is self-care to yourself because you knew what you couldn't take on. So you eliminated that stressful situation from the future. Instead of getting overburdened with those deadlines, you recognize that your body's already at that point. You said no to begin with. You start to practice some other techniques we're going to show you to bring that body back down and calm your body back down. And then you're progressing and moving forward. So you're processing your body cues, you're emotional, but you're also working with all things. So the next kind of step or building block in this resiliency piece is building that sense of community. So staying connected with your friends and family. Now, what's nice about it is technology, things like Zoom do make it a little easier, email. It doesn't have to be a call every Tuesday. It's whatever works for you guys, but having that sense of community or having that sense of family, whatever that means to you, is what we're looking for, because the more you share with others, human beings are naturally social creatures. We are designed to interact with people. Yes, you have different personality types, that you have introverts and extroverts and factors like that. But in general, simple terms, we are social creatures. So you have to find your tribe or your community and connect with what works for you. And the other part of that is understanding that it's okay to share your burdens, maybe with some people, but not others, but also to understand that maybe your connection is not to share. Maybe your connection is, you go to your friend or your family for the laugh or the joy, or, the kind of the moment of being present in this mindfulness that we'll talk about in a little bit later. And that helps, again, to bring that body back down to normal. The other piece of that connection is that sometimes you just need additional support, and that's okay. Meaning that there is no shame, no foul, no problem in reaching out to that professional for whatever that reason. You don't have to have a major life issue, a huge stressor, a trauma, a concern to reach out to a professional. If you have the means, the opportunity, or the ability, I strongly encourage everyone, because the more, just like that muscle, the more you practice that self-awareness, that building of that resiliency, that fostering that wellness, that connecting to your body, that recognizing what your body is doing, the easier it becomes down the line. And then your final kind of like point is this idea of meaning. And when I say meaning, I don't necessarily always mean like find your why. Why are we alive? Why are we, humans? That's great. You can do that if you, solve the universe's problems. That's fantastic. Feel free to share with the rest of us. But this idea, when I say meaning, is in those stressful situations, how can you reframe that stressful situation? How can you look at it from a different lens or a different perspective? Okay, so again, we talked about earlier about this idea that stress is actually a good thing. And when you think about a stressful situation, a very short stressful situation, as a good thing, it actually changes how we process it. So for example, how many of you guys have ever been super, by a show of hands, super frustrated, stuck in traffic? Right? I know I have. It's just frustrating. You're at a deadline, but maybe reframing that conversation and say, you know what? I'm stuck in traffic, but this means I can listen to a podcast, or look, this great song came on the radio and I can enjoy. You know what? I'm stuck in traffic, but I'm right by a lake. So I'm going to roll the window down and see if I can see any birds or, smell any fresh air, depending on the traffic you're stuck in, kind of thing. It's this opportunity to reframe this little task that frustrates you. And then when it comes to people, it's the same idea. So maybe you get really stressed or really frustrated or really angry because that person was very rude to you. Before you just let that build and you recognize it in your body, and before you let that build, maybe it's like taking that step back and saying, you know what? Wonder what was going on with that person today. I wonder what happened in their life. I'm not saying you have to solve it. I'm not saying you're going to fix it. I'm not saying you're going to help. I'm not saying any of that. It just mentally in your own head, before you get so angry and it stretches across your day and causes your body to get into that full-on stress response, and those symptoms start to create. And now you have to go and do it, stress technique to bring your body back to center before you ever get to that point. Stopping and thinking, maybe there's something going on in their life. It happens to me all the time when I'm talking to somebody and they're rude or short. I instantly want to get defensive. And then I take a step back. I don't know what's going on in their life. They don't know what's going on with mine. And I take a deep breath and I move forward. Okay. And these idea of that reframing, and that's where I say meaning is finding the purpose. So why is this situation happening? What's going on about it? How can you see it in a different way? And then embracing these positive thoughts instead of dwelling down into this, I'm frustrated, I'm mad, I'm angry. All of these are emotions and all of these are valid and all of these are important to have, but allowing yourself not to sit in them, allowing yourself to process them, feel them, and then move forward. Okay. And sometimes it's that simple of, you know what, I'm sorry, that I hope that person's having a better day later. And you don't carry that with you. Okay. But once you start to build into these resiliency techniques, these kind of 4 broad categories, they become more and more, just like every muscle, second nature, meaning that, when you start, again, lifting those weights, you start out with 5 pounds or 10 pounds and you're like, wow, I know when I started out the other day, joking, I haven't lifted, honestly, in probably 2 years from the pandemic. My husband joked with me. He's like, are you going to be able to lift the milk carton? I was like, nope, probably not. Probably not. This is probably where I'm going to die with my little 2 or 5 pound weights. But you progress, you build, you get better. Okay. And it's the same with this resiliency and these broad concepts. Now, again, these have all been talked about from this like kind of tangible theory based. What we're going to dive into now are some very specific things that you can do to then actually help manage that stress. So building on all those concepts that we just dove into. So we've divided them into 2 categories. So your first category is physical techniques. So again, when your body responds as it's supposed to stress, which is a great thing, you've got to give somewhere to let that energy go. And that's what we want to do. That brings us back down to normal and prevents that chronic stress. So you can do things like Massages are good and, to help kind of move the lactic acid through your body, relieve some of that tension in the muscles from where they got tight. But, not everybody has that, and that's okay. You can do things like heat, using a heating pad, or take a hot shower. It does that same kind of idea. A breath technique, and there's so many. Today, we're going to introduce you to one specific option and the benefits of breath techniques in a few minutes, and actually kind of guide you through an exercise. But this is a really good one, is being aware of that breath. Exercise. I don't know how many of you have ever had that moment where you're stressed, I'm angry, I'm cranky, I come home, my husband's like, so we working out today? And I'm like, no, I don't want to. And then I do my workout, all the endorphins kick in, and I'm so much better. It is proven that it actually shifts the hormones in your brain. And instead of firing all those stress hormones, you have shifted and put things back into that positive direction. So exercise is a great way to physically, a technique to reduce some of the stress. Then again, getting back to this idea of relaxation, progressive muscle relaxation. And that's just where, again, you're being aware of what do you feel in your body. So where is it stress, and actually physically releasing. So for me, it's my shoulders. So I know when I feel it, I physically do a few shoulder rolls to release the tension within that area or muscle. And that's this progressive muscle relaxation. And it's not, look, everything, but it's being aware. It could be simply, if you've been riding a long time, stretching out your palms, your fingers, it's whatever it is for you. Okay, so those are your physical techniques. Then you get into a component of the mental techniques. And mental techniques, again, is this idea of just focusing on what's going on in your mind. So the others kind of focus on what's going on with your body. These are trying to focus on what's going on to your mind and processing those emotions. So some of the activities that we're going to kind of introduce you to today is, like I said, that visualization activity. And that's a good way to just kind of step outside of where you are and outside of a situation, and we'll dive into that. There's also things like meditation, mindfulness as a whole, and I have whole classes and programs and presentations on mindfulness, but we're going to introduce you to this idea of mindful eating, because that's one of the things that we do every day, and that's an opportunity to, again, get back to how do you feel, build that connection, be aware of that mind body, and enhancing that meaning. So do you see we're building right back into the resiliency? Listening to music can be a way. So it can be relaxing sounds, or it could be, dance parties, all of which are helpful. Going back to my example of you're driving in the car, you get in that traffic, but then your favorite jam comes on and all of a sudden you feel better, at least for a moment. It's that kind of idea. Maybe you have a playlist that you create that's, my traffic jam playlist, or whatever that may be. Hobbies and opportunities to, again, share and connect, whether it be with yourself or others. Okay. And then you get into the idea of the, therapy sessions, journaling, and social support. I can't say enough about the benefits of those types of resources out there and those type of opportunities. So what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of transition from this theory-based kind of conversation, and we're going to actually spend the remainder of our presentation walking you through a specific technique. So the first is breath exercise. So the reason I started with breath exercise is because your breathing is essential, meaning that you do it every single day without even being aware of it. Okay. It is completely unconscious unless we're conscious of it, which we do not generally pay attention to it unless we get into this stress state. How many of you guys have ever started to have that anxiety moment and you start to hyperventilate, or you start to get overwhelmed and you start to notice that you quit breathing? Okay. Unless you're somebody that's had something like, maybe it's swim lessons, because, if you've had a swim coach, they teach you in that portion how to breathe. And there's a conversation where you actually talk about when to inhale and when to exhale, or a chorus coach as when to, breathe in and when to blow out as you're singing, or a running coach, or unless you've had very specific like types of things where they really dive into breath, it is something we all do every single day that we're not even aware of, but it is something that we do in the here and now. You can't take a big breath for your future and think that helps, because you just end up holding your breath and you eventually have to exhale. Just like your past breath isn't going to help you in the past. So your breath is only in the here and now. And that is one of the first steps into reframing and rediscussing this stress. So the first one I'm going to introduce you to, and kind of there's many, many, many different breath techniques. They get all sorts of combinations and purposes and body functions. But the one I'm going to introduce you to today is just called equal parts breathing, or sometimes it's one-on-one breathing. And the reason I do this is because it is something that we have mostly done before, but I'm not sure everybody's conscious about it. And when you start to become conscious of this technique, then you start to be able to use it whenever you need it. And basically, it just helps to kind of reduce that anxiety feeling. It helps to reframe those negative emotions, and it also anchors you to that moment. And so to do it, it's just the deep breath that we've all done before. So the technique is to, and I'd like everybody to do this with me, is if you are standing, please take a seat in a comfortable position. If you feel like it, you can lie down on the ground. It's completely up to your comfort level, but I'd like you to just sit very comfortably and go ahead and close your eyes. So the first part of this is to exhale out all of your air. And then you're just going to breathe in and out on the same rhythm. So we're going to exhale out and we're going to breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4, and out. 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4, and out. 2, 3, 4. Breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4, and out. 2, 3, 4. And go ahead, when you do this, take 1 or 2 on your own. And then I would like you to go ahead and open up your eyes for me. Okay. And why I introduced you to that one is because that one can be done very simply. So the next time you get frustrated by that rude person, take those few deep breaths. The next time when you wake up in the morning, take those few deep breaths to reinvigorate your day and reframe the, oh, I hate morning Mondays attitude, to reframe that. Or even it's been proven that taking those few deep breaths like that, even as simply as 3 or 4 before you go to bed at night, will actually help you to fall asleep significantly faster, because it literally brings that body back down to that center. It slows that heart rate. It controls that breathing. It tells all of your firing and your neurons and your system and your hormones that you're okay, because it's getting in that oxygen that it needs to flow through your body. Again, there's many, many, many different breath techniques, but this is kind of the easiest one to start with. And it's kind of the most normalized. Nobody's going to fault you if you take a few deep breaths. That everybody does it. We're just not always conscious of why we're doing it or the real benefits it has to our body. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and transition to our next very specific kind of technique. And that's this concept or introduction of mindfulness. I'm going to turn it over to Adrienne, and she's going to cover this part.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm going to talk to you today about mindful eating. So we know the scientific purpose of eating is to provide the body with the energy needed for daily function. But nowadays, due to the stress of daily endeavors, we have a habit of using our food for comfort. Food has moved from being about nourishment alone, which of course adds to our stress because of the fact that it will cause us to gain weight unintentionally. So let's bring ourselves back to where we're supposed to be, where we bring mindful eating in. And that is effective to retrain ourselves to not rely on food for comfort.
Got it.
Thank you.
You got it.
And the way we do this is we incorporate the senses. With mindful eating, we focus on the body's natural cues for hunger and satiety. We bring awareness to ourselves so that we understand the effect the food that we eat has on our bodies. So when we go into mindful eating, and I encourage if, is there a way they can screenshot?
It's
this?
being recorded.
Oh, good.
Mhm.
So come back to this with the actual instructions on everything to do for mindful eating. You want to involve every sense, your sight and touch, the smell of the food prior to eating. Slowly take the time to chew, feel the sensations in your mouth, taste it, listen to the sounds being made while you're eating. If you're one of those people who can't stand the way chewing sounds, I'm so very sorry. But it is a very necessary step so that way you can truly be aware of your body's response to the food that you're consuming. You're going to use all of your senses and experience the entire meal, because eating as a whole should be an enjoyable experience, and taking the time to actually fully invest your senses in the experience will allow you to use it for what it was meant to. So the definition of mindful eating is the act of purposefully slowing down to think about and savor and enjoy your food. And they have actual evidence that mindful eating has been shown to reduce mindless and emotional eating. So it can, in fact, reduce stressful eating and the need to consume something in order to relieve your stress. This literature review actually goes into full depth onto all the benefits and the setbacks of mindful eating, because of course there is always benefits and setbacks. Some go into mindful eating thinking, oh, this is a new diet phase. I can go ahead and lose some weight with this. That's not the purpose of mindful eating. Unfortunately, it will not be a relevant tool for weight loss. But the benefits of mindful eating is that it changes your relationship with food. It improves it. It causes you to remember that food is for sustenance and not for comfort. And you can then utilize food and the various different types to be able to nourish your body and be less stressed and propel yourself forward as needed so that you can move on with your day and not feel like I need a bag of chips or I need a chocolate or I need a soda because I'm just stressed out and it's killing me. There's also strong evidence to suggest that it will bring more awareness to your hunger and satiety, because it does involve your mind entirely with your body as you're eating. You get to experience the sensation of feeling full. So that actually, normally when you're eating, your body doesn't really feel that sensation until well after you've gotten most of your meal done. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm really stuffed. This is way further than I meant. With mindful eating, you're slowing yourself down and giving your mind the chance to register the sensation of food in your body and make the connection that you are full and it's time to stop. So as a wrap up of it, mindful eating, the intention is to improve your relationship with food. And there's been enough study to show that it does in fact do that, and it can reduce the stress that food can bring into a person's life.
Yes. So that was just kind of a quick overview to this idea again of mindfulness. And the idea of mindfulness is a way to, again, we talked about an actual tangible technique that you can use to help reduce your stress. And to Adrian's point, how many of you guys have ever sat down where you just feel overwhelmed or stressed and you ate that bag of chips, you ate that cookie, and now your stomach hurts and now you have to run to the bathroom, and that just adds to that stressful situation because we weren't aware of those body cues. We just did something as a reactionary thing. And that's what we're trying to get away from, which is why we wanted to introduce you to this concept of mindfulness. So again, if you have the opportunity to record this, to go back to that slide. She's actually kind of put those step-by-step instructions for you of what to look for when you're looking at your sight and your touch, how to inhale and exhale, to smell, what specifically when you're tasting and chewing and being aware of how much you're chewing. And then again, that sound. And you don't just have to focus on the sound of your chewing. For those of you that hate the sound of chewing, what other sounds do you hear around you? Do you hear birds chirping outside? Do you hear the humming of a fan? Do you hear your air conditioning unit? What other, do you hear other people talking in and around you? What are your family or friends saying? Is it a joyful conversation? Like, be aware of all of those kind of thing. And so the last thing we're going to end on today and kind of this tool is this visualization activity. And this visualization activity is just exactly what it sounds like. It's this idea of kind of stepping outside of your situation. I would love to say that whenever you're stressed, you can pop off and have a vacation whenever you feel like it. Like, I'm stressed today, bye, I'm just gonna leave. I'm gonna have my pina colada by the yacht, like in all those country songs you hear. That's not a case. But what you can do is this visualization. And visualization is, again, that mindset of reframing that conversation. So what I'd like everybody to do is, again, if you're standing, go ahead and sit down and get a comfortable seated position. If you are already sitting and you feel like you want to lay down, that's fine. You're totally option to. But the idea is that you want to be as comfortable as possible. And then I want you to go ahead and take a nice big deep breath in for me, and then close your eyes for me again. Now, at this point, I would like you to imagine yourself traveling to a relaxing, wonderful place. This place could be real, a place that you visited in the past, or maybe a place that you would like to go in the future. It can be a place that completely exists in your imagination. When you go to this place, the big thing is that you feel perfectly safe. Nothing bad can happen to you there. And while you're in this place, none of those other daily annoyances of everyday life can get to you. There's no bugs or crowds or troubling issues. It's simply a place where you get to get away and let go of all those stresses and worries that you normally carry within you. While you're feeling this safety and this comfort, take a look around you, okay? What does it look like? What sounds do you hear? Imagine in great detail, what does this place look like? And remember how safe you are, how nothing bad can be brought to you, and how that feels, okay? There's no danger here. You can't be bothered by anything that is in that daily aspect of life. Okay? You are just aware of how good and positive your body feels. While in this state, you're going to take a few minutes to stay here and just relax and enjoy this special place, this place that is just for you. This place that now that you visited, you can remember and realize that you can come back to time and time again. All you have to do is kind of re-visualize those details, remind yourself of how this visit felt, remind yourself of your safety, and stay present. Now, this exercise, if you were, like I said, listening to this recording, I would ask you to pause here and stay in this safe, kind of neutral environment. So I'm going to go ahead and stop talking for like a minute, give everybody a chance, and then we'll kind of regroup. Okay, I'm going to invite everybody to go ahead and slowly open their eyes and go ahead and turn your cameras back on if you're interested and join us back. The idea of this visualization activity is, again, to have that space to really put all of those aspects we've talked about, those theories, the tangible components into practice, and have you're safe and comfortable to, again, bring that body back down to center. So at this point, I am going to put my contact information up on the board and ask if there are any questions, comments, concerns, examples of techniques you guys like to use or stories you like to share. Kind of this your time to kind of ask some questions. If you're curious, and I'll go back to this slide in just a minute, but if you're curious about kind of some of the resources we've talked about, we have the resource guide if this is something you're really interested in to kind of dive further into. Again, this presentation is being recorded, so you don't have to try to memorize what this is. You can go back and revisit this. But are there any questions, comments, concerns? You can feel free to unmute yourself and share them or simply put them in the chat, whatever works best for you.
Yeah, I'll follow the chat as well, but I will start by saying I stay very busy with a lot of different things, as Angelica knows, but I try to balance that out with other alternative activities like I have a habit of photography. I collect music, different types of music, and I like to go do trail walking. So those are probably the three areas that help me so I can continue on day to day. And if anybody's interested, a really good place to go walk is the wetlands at the end of Wickham.
Yes, it is a beautiful area to walk. Keith introduced me to it. It's one of my new favorite hikes. So I see in the chat, somebody put that they recently incorporated breathing and love that they can take their moments of rest, kind of that moment for that brain. And that's a great way to think about it. Again, to Keith's point, you got to find what works for you. The idea of these tools, these resources is just to introduce you to these concepts or new ideas that you may or may not have practiced before, but it is up to what works for you. Just like each person's body reacts differently to stress, each person's body will respond differently when you're building those resiliency muscles. Any other thoughts, comments, things like that? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to go ahead and say thank you for participating in the presentation. Again, my name is Angelica Keene, and that's my contact information. So if you think of anything or want to learn more, I'm always happy to help whenever possible. So at this point, if Keith, you could go ahead and pause the recording.
Sure, and to just share also that this will be posted on the Mayor's Fitness Challenge Facebook page afterwards.